So glad to have you. We've known each other for years. Worked together for years. It's so great. We've always wanted to talk about Artful Dodger.
Oh, I'm excited.
All right, so we're going to go back to the beginning. What was it about the character of Jack in the Oliver Twist story that made you want to tell his story?
Well, to me, Dodger is where the Artful Dodger is where Oliver Twist comes alive. I actually don't like Oliver Twist as a character. I think he's boring and kind of wet. And, you know, obviously the way that Dickens was writing that book was to be published in serial chunks, like episodes, right? And so he couldn't go back and revise. And to me, when Dodger and Fagin arrive on the scene, that book becomes electric. And he's so exciting and so interesting because he is the one person that really pushes back against Fagin in a way that's brave and plucky and interesting. He's also really proud of being a criminal. It's his profession. And I love that. And so for me, I just think that's such an exciting character to get to work with.
All right, so you had the great opening with Jack playing gambling.
Right.
How did you land in the pilot episode, his introduction to the character?
It's a really good question. We actually had a whole different other introduction to the pilot that we'd planned to film. We had been scoping locations, which actually started the story at the end of Oliver Twist, when Dodger does the crime that got him put into prison, when Fagin abandoned him, and when he's chucked in jail at the end. And we were going to tell that story and then connect it across. But, you know, for various reasons, we decided that wasn't the optimal way to enter the series. So Jeff Walker, who was the setup director on episode 1, back in season 1, we put our heads together and Jeff thought, well, what if we did a musical sequence to Joker and the Thief? And I liked that idea. And so we then kind of came up with that kinetic opening. That gambling sequence was always going to be there, but it then became the focal point of the opener, which was great because we got to shoot it on a ship and we got to have rats, and it was great fun.
But I did love the moment where he's gambling on how fast he can amputate the leg.
Oh, yes.
I thought that was a brilliant follow-up. Right? You had the great, but then it was a good way of introducing surgery and gambling, but he's still compassionate. I love that. So what was it about giving that nuanced thing where you had the fun of the gambling, we're laughing, but he actually did care?
Well, that moment where Thomas leans over and said, you know, take your mind to your friendliest memory. I can't remember exactly what he said, but that was pivotal for establishing the character. That gambling on the leg, that happened, right? And the 28-second amputation, that's based on the truth of Robert Listant's amputations. But it was really important to show that Dodger cared about his patients, particularly when they're taking bets on how fast they're going to be able to saw his leg off. And, you know, it's such a privilege to get to work with an actor of the caliber of Thomas Brodiesangster, of course with Nicholas Burton playing Dr. Sneed in that scene. And Thomas can go from, you know, lovable roguish hero to deeply compassionate doctor on the turn of a dime, and that's why that scene works.
What did you see in Thomas that made you know that he was perfect to play the character?
You know, that's a great question. We looked, Thomas wasn't available, as I remember, when we were first looking for Dodgers, and we looked at a lot of different people, and then Thomas became available and was generous enough to chemistry read with David Thewlis, who had generously agreed to play Fagin. And they read together in London in the studio, and he breathed the character out of him. The minute that Thomas stepped onto the screen, we all stood around and said, "You could print that. That could be the opening sequence, right?" Aside from the fact that they're not in costume, he just breathed the character out so organically and played it in such a grounded way that it was unlike anything I'd seen. And to me, the character of the Artful Dodger is surprisingly difficult to write, because he's surrounded by so many big, colourful characters. And really, it was only when Thomas's voice came through the character that I finally realised that's who he is. So for me, it was a really organic moment of just feeling like I'm not watching somebody perform a role, I'm watching the Artful Dodger step out. It's a testament to Thomas's extraordinary skill as an actor.
And you mentioned David, which I wanted to ask you about.
Sure.
How that's a difficult relationship. The Jack and Fagin, I mean, creatively, what did you see in the two actors together that made you know that they could pull that off together?
Well, it's not a difficult relationship personally. You know, they're both extraordinarily lovely, very kind people who have a very warm relationship offset. You know, to me, they are two of their generation's greatest British talents. And, you know, chemistry is something that's hard to define, but you know it when you see it, and we certainly saw it on that chemistry read. And I think that both of them were playing quite heightened characters in a profoundly grounded and realist way. And that to me was really important for anchoring the tone of the show. And, I think that the combined skill and nuance of both actors working side by side, it was a natural and instinctual fit from the first minute we saw it. And that was the decision right there in the room.
Now, obviously, Belle is a critical character,
Yes.
and I love her opening, committed to surgery, but not unwilling to blackmail to get her way to help. What was eventually their I love their meet cute, really, if you think about it. What was their building their relationship, because it's such a fascinating relationship, and she also has a dark side.
Yeah, look, I love writing Lady Belle so much, and again, we're so privileged to get to have one of Australia's great actresses, Maia Mitchell, play the role. Maia, of course, has a storied history on American television, so it's fantastic to have her back in Australia. For me, Lady Belle is kind of loosely based on my own wife, Rebecca, who is a professor of medieval literature, and I just thought, what would happen if she was in the 1850s and someone said, you can't do your intellectual work, you have to go to a tea party. And that was the genesis for Belle, but Maia brings so much of Maia to the character, which is critical, because to me, Lady Belle needs to have a sense of humor. She needs to have a joy and a warmth to her, I think, to make the character feel lived in and grounded. Otherwise, the character wouldn't come across, I think, in the successful way that she does under Maia's oversight. And when Maia was generous enough to chemistry read for us while she was in the middle of filming another movie from her trailer, and immediately she was the person that I saw with the warmth and the spark and the humor. And that is because Maia is herself she's a great sense of humor, she's a very warm, funny person, she's very down to earth, and that, I think, is pivotal for making that character feel organic in the way that she does.
Now, we take them to season 2, where now they're star-crossed lovers. Like, They're separated. What was the problem from the writing standpoint of kind of now building the story where they're separate? We love them together, but now pulling them apart.
It's always hard to pull apart people you want to be together, right? I mean, I think it's necessary for the drama organically because the characters are suffering from enormous social difference, right? There's an enormous pressure against that marriage at that time. In the 1850s, she's the daughter of an earl, she's the daughter of the governor, he's a convict who's come from the streets. Their relationship is unlikely, and to me that's what makes it burn so brightly too. And so I thought it was necessary for the architecture of the show, but also for those characters to have to really earn that relationship. And obviously it's sad to pull them apart, but I'm proud of the work that the writing team did to find an organic way to achieve that. And I think it also allowed us to explore Lady Jane in a lot more depth. And I always try to write an antagonist in a very humanized way, right? And to me, Lady Jane has her heart in the right place. She loves her daughter. She's acting totally reasonably given her class circumstances. And so it was great to be able to explore that family dynamic as part of season 2.
Now, you also evolved Jack and Fagan's relationship.
Sure.
A little more, the crimes are going up, less petty.
Right.
What was the process like of trying to take their characters into a more evolved state?
Well, I want Fagan to always be on this journey of rising up through. Port Victory is a unique place for Fagan to actually rise through the ranks. And it's kind of loosely inspired by the journey of Mr. McCorber, who is the debtor from David Copperfield. Mr. McCorber ends up as a magistrate in Australia. And so to me, I wanted Fagan to be tested by moving into white-collar crime, where the people he's dealing with, like Elizabeth Maxwell, played wonderfully by Kate Mulvaney, brilliant Australian actor and playwright, and one of our writers who wrote episode 3 and 7 on season 2. So I wanted him to be up against really serious antagonists. And the crime that they do, which is to sell a fake colony in the centre of Australia, is actually based on a real scam from the mid-19th century. There was someone in Edinburgh who sold a fake colony in South America, and it got too big too quickly. People believed him. He made hundreds of thousands of pounds. People were going out there in ships, and he kind of couldn't stop it. So he wanted Fagan to bite off more than he could chew, which of course enables a great character evolution for Lady Fanny when she becomes the key piece to the puzzle of accessing this white-collar world for him.
And our last question, this could have been shot anywhere, ultimately, but it was shot in Australia. How did that help tell the story?
I think it adds something really distinct visually to the production design because we're shooting it under the baking hot Australian sun. You can't disguise that. One of the reasons why we didn't shoot that initial opening of setting it in London was it's just really hard to shoot gloomy London in Australia, right? And I think that brings a new dynamic to the Dickensian influence of the story world. It also allows us to tell stories about Australian history, importantly to tell First Nations stories, and to really, treat British colonialism head-on and critically as we go into that story, which is always something that's been important to me, and it's been a privilege to get to work with great First Nation storytellers like Luke Carroll and Miranda Tapsell, who not only played Red, but has been a writer in the room for 2 seasons. And so I think the Australian dynamic does something very different because it takes these characters from the gloomy streets of London and brings them into the sun-baked world of Australia where everything can kill you, right? And that was a fun thing to explore with Fagin in particular.